Mansa Musa became the emperor of the Mali Empire around 1312, after his predecessor disappeared on a daring trip across the Atlantic. He took over an empire that was built on West Africa's seemingly endless gold deposits and controlled trade routes that went across the Sahara to Cairo and beyond. Mali wasn't just rich, it was incomprehensibly rich. Mansa Musa went on his famous Hajj to Mecca in 1324. But it wasn't just any pilgrimage. His caravan was a sight to see, with thousands of servants, camels carrying food, and most importantly, tons of gold. His kindness knew no bounds when he stopped in Cairo for 3 months. He gave out so much gold that he caused hyperinflation all by himself, which made the local currency lose value for more than 10 years. Imagine being so rich that your charity brings down the whole economy. He came back from Mecca with scholars and architects and changed cities like Timbuktu and Gao into centers of Islamic culture and learning. He ordered the building of mosques, palaces, and universities that would turn his empire into a center of trade and learning. He was so famous that he was drawn as a golden king on the 1375 Catalan Atlas, a European map. This picture later inspired Portuguese explorers to look for Mali's famous gold. But there are a few things people get wrong about this well-known story. In 1324, Mansa Musa, the emperor of the Mali Empire, went on a pilgrimage to Mecca. It was so over the top that people have remembered it for almost 700 years. The most popular version of the story, which is told over and over in books, articles, and videos, is about a king who is covered in gold, leads a caravan of 60,000 slaves, and spends so much money that Cairo's economy was ruined for more than 10 years. This exaggerated story about a king needs to be looked at very closely. Sadly, the most recent versions of this story are based on the same sources that were written hundreds of years after his famous Hajj to Mecca. The primary sources, which are the accounts written by people who were in Cairo and Mecca in the 1320s and 1330s, tell a story that is very different from the ones we know today. It tells the story of a smart politician who uses the Hajj to make deals with people inside and outside of his country. It's time to stop believing the myths and find out what really happened on Mansa Musa's famous trip. The most harmful and long-lasting myth is that there were a lot of slaves. The Tariq al-Sudan, which Abd al-Rahman al-Sadi wrote in Timbuktu in 1655, 331 years after the pilgrimage, is the main source for this number. This source is not only hundreds of years old, but even modern historians like Michael Gomez have made mistakes with it. Al-Sadi's writing says that there were 60,000 people in the caravan, and he makes it clear that only 500 of them were slaves who ran ahead of the emperor. The other 59,500 were soldiers. So what is the truth? We need to read the only first-hand account we have from someone who actually saw the caravan. A scholar from Mecca named Abd Allah al-Yafi'i wrote about Musa's time in the holy city. And what he wrote is very interesting. He doesn't say thousands of his soldiers, also known as askar, instead of a lot of slaves. More importantly, he talks about a tense and violent event that happened in the sacred mosque in Mecca between Musa's men and the Mamluk Turks. This event was called a fitna, disagreement, or fight. Things got so bad that swords were drawn. So Mansa Musa had to step in from a window that looked out over the Kaaba. He was very angry with them because of this fitna to get his men to back down. People who are slaves don't do things like this. The first accounts written in 1324 by Mamluk officials in Cairo who met the caravan, support the idea that the group was free. In 1331, the historian Al-Nuwair called them Musa's company. Ibn al-Dawadar in 1335 referred to them as his friends. The famous Al-Umar, who gives the most detailed account, calls them companions and his suite. When Al-Umar says that the Mamluk Sultan gave Mansa Musa some Turkish slaves to take back with him, he's only talking about slaves. They were a gift, not people he brought with him. The Syrian historian Zayn ibn al-Ward and some other sources also call the group Takrur. In Egypt and the Hejaz, this was a specific word for free, religious, West African Muslim pilgrims. It was a way to show respect, not a name for slaves. Years later, the famous world traveler Ibn Battuta went to Mali and met some high-ranking officials who had gone on the Hajj with Mansa Musa. Hajj Abd al-Rahman, the royal Qadi or judge, and Hajj Faba Maga, a powerful official, were not slaves. The caravan was made up of Mali's best and brightest people, like judges, officials, scholars, and soldiers, all going on the pilgrimage with their emperor. How did the story get so messed up? There was a pattern of rumors and lies that grew over time. The first person to give a specific number for the entourage was Zayn ibn al-Ward. Based on what he heard, he said it was more than 10,000 takrur. By 1366, Ibn Qatar, another Syrian historian, had raised this number to around 20,000. The most outrageous claims were made in the 15th century. The Egyptian encyclopedist Al-Kalkashand wrote the story of the 12,000 maids in 1412. But he starts this claim with the important phrase, "It is said that," which is a clear sign that he is not telling the truth. Instead of using the Arabic word jawar, which means female slaves, he uses wasa'if, which means female domestic servants. This detail, along with the eyewitness account of armed male soldiers, shows that the idea of a large group of women is not true. People often exaggerate in historical stories, but in the case of Mansa Musa, this has made it harder to find the truth. A sensationalized and false story about a king and his harem has taken the place of the truth about a free and wealthy West African Muslim group. Everyone knows the story of Mansa Musa in his gold. The most common number is 100 camel loads, and each one carries 300 pounds of gold. That's a mind-boggling 12 to 13 tons altogether. The amount was definitely huge, but it's also wrong to think that it was all his own money. We know that his entourage was made up of wealthy and powerful officials who would have brought their own gold with them. People from West Africa who went on pilgrimages were thought to be wealthy. Most people from West Africa who go on the Hajj are still rich today. A 16th century account says that one pilgrim left 200 mithqals of gold in Egypt to keep it safe. Did he hurt Cairo's economy? He really messed it up. Al-Makars, a historian from later, said that the flow of Malian gold made the dinar worth less. A modern addition that isn't in the primary sources is the common claim that he caused a 12-year recession. The economy did change, but it wasn't the exaggerated 10-year depression, it was a shock to the market. A lot of people also believe that Mansa Musa returned from his pilgrimage with an Arab architect named Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, who then built the famous mosques in Gao and Timbuktu. Some people have said that the great buildings of the Mali Empire came from the Arab world because of this story. Sheikh Anta Diop, a Senegalese scholar, says that this is an abusive interpretation of documents. The pyramidal shapes and adobe construction of the big mosques in Mali are typical of the area. This style comes from the Nile Valley in the ancient civilizations of Kemet and Nubia. In the Arab world, buildings are built differently. The mosques in Mali were built by Kamite, black architects using their own skills and knowledge. After the Songhai Empire fell, scholars wrote the Timbuktu Chronicles. These books have long been valued as some of the oldest internal sources on West African history. These books give detailed descriptions of the Mali and Songhai empires, written by people whose families lived through the empire's golden ages. But modern historians are becoming more aware of their limits. These chroniclers weren't just writing down facts. They were making up stories based on their own political and intellectual backgrounds. Historian Paulo de Moraes Farias found that the chronicler Al-Sadi dismissed the historically important city of Gao as a center of undiluted paganism, not knowing how important it really was based on archaeological evidence. Farias warns that the authors of Timbuktu were not just informants, but historians like us who had their own problems with putting the past back together. Historian Mauro Nobili also said that the famous Tariq al-Fatash was mostly written in the 19th century and used sources from the 17th century. It was a carefully crafted reconstruction, not a perfect historical record. The chroniclers themselves even admitted that their sources were not perfect. In 1664, Ibn al-Mukhtar wrote about the famous Mansa Musa's pilgrimage. He told readers that many of the stories about Musa seemed made up, like the ones that said he built a mosque in every town he visited on Fridays, or that his servants dug pools in the desert for his wife. Ibn al-Mukhtar warned, stories about his journey have many false anecdotes that the mind refuses to accept. The lesson, even the most important historical sources need to be looked at carefully, because they are shaped by the views and limitations of the people who made them. If the Hajj wasn't about showing off wealth to slaves, what was it about? Politics is the answer. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage was a smart way to solve a big political problem, his own legitimacy. He became king in 1312, but he was not a direct descendant of Sundiata Keita, the man who started the empire. He was a direct descendant of Sundiata's younger brother, Manden Bukhari. This break in the main line led to a crisis of legitimacy. Like other Malian leaders who had the same problems, Musa used the Hajj to make his rule stronger. The journey itself was a sign of strength and loyalty. At first, he wouldn't kneel in front of the Mamluk, Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad in Cairo. He said that, as a fellow Muslim, he only bowed to God. He bravely said that he was an equal sovereign, not a vassal. He finally agreed to a compromise. But the point was made. People outside of his country praised him as a great Muslim king, which helped him at home. The real story of Mansa Musa's pilgrimage is more interesting than the myth in many ways. It's not a story about a dictator showing off his wealth with a lot of slaves. It is the story of a powerful and religious emperor sending a large group of the best soldiers, scholars, and officials from his country on a difficult and important diplomatic and religious mission. It tells the story of a well-run country that can move thousands of armed men and tons of gold across the Sahara Desert. It tells the story of an African king who is sure of himself and knows how to deal with other kings. The myths are fun, but they make his real achievement seem less impressive. They take away a story of smart statecraft and native power and give you a simple and wrong picture instead. Mansa Musa was not only the richest man in the world, he was also a brilliant political strategist and the head of a large and complicated empire. The exaggerated stories about his trip have kept this fact hidden for too long.